Hi everyone, welcome to the first ever Sprintax Tax Talk series, which is a conversation between Sprintax representatives on the non-resident tax trends that we're seeing within the market. So let's introduce who's in the conversation today.
Hey everyone, it's Ryan Ludden here from the Sprintax team.
Also here, Anna Fitzpatrick from the Sprintax team.
And I'm Neil Duffy. So I guess, guys, it's probably topical based on the time of the year that we're in to start this conversation with tax preparation and tax returns and the trends that we're seeing there. So I guess let's look at kind of one of the big trends that we're seeing already with anyone that's filed with Sprintax, and that has to be the J market. Obviously the J market, over COVID definitely was affected quite a bit, even more so I would say than the F and J student market. But when we're looking at those J summer work travel visas, those J camp counselors, the au pair visas, we're really seeing through their tax returns this year, there's a massive trend in these visas being in the US last year. What are you guys seeing in terms of trends on your end?
Yeah, I mean, from the ACA National Conference earlier this month or last month, we had very positive whispers of more JCAM counsellors arriving into the US in 2022 and into 2023 as well. As you mentioned, Neil, 2020 and 2021 were probably little to no individuals. So it's positive to hear that they're coming back. And we're also seeing that on our side in terms of tax return numbers on the J side.
Definitely.
Yeah, like really, really positive to see that the across the J market. But I suppose another maybe related trend to that is also that we've seen surprisingly a lot more early filers getting things kicked off, certainly through Sprintax, and it's quite interesting to see that there's a lot more engagement and folks thinking about doing their taxes now. I don't know, is that maybe with everything going on with inflation, maybe folks are looking for a little some extra cash in their pockets and are thinking about doing taxes to see is there anything there. But it's been very interesting to see that folks have been starting earlier, because usually we see this wave of last minute filers.
Yeah, it's been great to see. And even just for those filers, it's great for them, because if they need to contact the IRS, you'd hope that it's easier to get in touch versus contacting on April the 15th, which I'm sure really there isn't a hope of many getting in contact with the IRS at that stage. So no, great to see. I guess another positive trend that we're seeing then is within the e-filing piece. So obviously Sprintax introduced e-filing, gosh, I guess it was 2 years ago at this stage. But we're seeing a lot more users on Sprintax being eligible to e-file, because obviously not everybody can e-file. They do need a social security number. There's some stipulations around if they received capital gains income, they're not eligible, and a whole host of other areas that'll negate them from e-filing. If certain numbers are missing from their W-2 or their 1042S. So again, it's a real positive trend to see that more people are eligible this year. But I guess just looking at then, I suppose some of the not so positive trends that we've seen in previous years, but continue to show up. I guess tax scams is a big one this year. And, I guess tax scams always rears its head every year. And it seems like they definitely tend to focus on non-resident, maybe international students who, aren't aware of how the IRS works. But again, it's definitely trending again this year. I guess from, we've been here a couple of years now in Sprintax, we tend to see how those tax scams change every year. I think from my time being here, one of the scariest that I've seen is an international student that received a phone call from someone pretending to be from the IRS. With that, they advised them that they had an outstanding IRS bill of, I think it was $2,000. They had all their basic information, could have been from LinkedIn or somewhere else. And they got the international student to agree to get into an Uber that was arranged by them, go to their local Apple store and purchase $2,000 in Apple vouchers. And then when they gave them that number, obviously there's no way of tracing that. But it's definitely something that everybody should be on the lookout for. And I guess in our experience, it's the sooner you communicate that to international students, the more we can limit them.
Yeah, and I can even add my own one there, and this maybe more on the J side, but we only a couple months back really, there was a company in Myrtle Beach that were promising that they could help non-residents. They were getting powers of attorney so they could file on their behalf. And what we ended up seeing, what happened was they were intentionally filing those non-residents as residents for tax purposes, claiming stimulus checks as well, and getting much larger refunds and keeping that cut on their side, which didn't end too well for the three individuals that were involved in that, as they got found out fairly quickly. And I think they're probably facing some serious penalties now, if not some time behind bars. So that just shows, there are folks out there that are there to maybe try and lead non-residents, down a different route. And I feel bad for non-residents because, in their eyes, they're very new to US tax system. They may not know the differences between resident and non-resident for tax purposes. So it's really always annoying when you see and hear of these stories continuing to pop up.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do remember that case, Ryan. I think that was widely reported last year, wasn't it? It was a big one.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and I know every year you do sessions with international offices, and I
Hmm.
suppose a part of that session is how to limit that. What's the advice that you generally give?
Yeah, definitely. And I know after the NAFTA conferences, this was a common conversation. There was even sessions specifically on scams, and one of those being tax scams. So we put together a little bit of a blog outlining some key things to look out for. The IRS will generally never call them and demand immediate payment over the phone. Like, the IRS are likely going to issue some type of a notice. You're going to, yes, certainly have to pay tax owed, but you're going to be given time to pay. So there are a couple of key things to look out for. The example you gave, Neil, of demanding Apple vouchers and things like that will never ever be the case. So there's kind of more stuff listed in the blog as well, and then also how to report a scam, reaching out to the IRS, and the correct numbers to contact there. But if ever in doubt, hold off. Try to reach out to the IRS, see if it's legitimate, and go from there. And kind of not to make any rash decisions on issuing payments when it may not be the IRS.
Yeah, definitely good advice. I guess we're with a session like this, we probably have a fairly varied experience level of who's actually listening. So obviously, we have the directors of international offices or payroll offices who might have been working with non-resident tax for many years and are very much aware of what needs to be done and have a real tight process in place. But I guess we see every year that there's new international advisors coming on board that, maybe we need to provide an overview of the basics. I guess let's provide a quick intro in who actually needs to file, which is kind of the starting point, really, isn't it? And I guess one of the things that we generally tend to see is that not everyone knows if they first start in an international office that everybody, if they're a non-resident on a FJ, or Q visa, if they spend any number of days in the US, need to file Form 8843. And I guess that's something that we see quite a bit, especially from someone that might have switched schools to a school that wouldn't necessarily have been that on top of taxes, but then went to a school that really has an airtight process. They then notice that obviously they have a lot of 843s to catch up on. I guess it's probably also worth noting that for anyone that's earned any US source income, they'll need to file a federal return. And then obviously, if they've met the state filing thresholds in the states that they lived in, there might also be a state return. Now that obviously sounds like basic information, but I guess obviously, as you know, guys, it's a question that we do get every year.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. And I suppose it might be also helpful to outline, is there, for someone who's maybe a new international officer, or even someone who's new to hiring or having or sending participants to the US that are on their, F or J visas, are there any kind of resources out there that can help them learn more about the US tax system for non-residents?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and it's a Sprintax plug, but I guess it's a good resource to have a look at our webinars. We do a ton of webinars every year. I think we did 300, possibly last year or the year before, and they give you a good overview of what you need to know, the basics you need to know around non-resident tax. And we also put a ton of information into our blogs and our YouTube channels. So if somebody's starting off as an international advisor, that's a great place to start. It'll give you a ton of answers to those basic questions that you might have. The NAFSA website is great. They've got a number of resources for non-residents. And then if anyone's getting questions on any tax treaties, and they want to look into the nuances of them, the IRS's website is pretty good for that as well. So there's the IRS's website a little bit heavier than how we would approach it. In terms of Sprintax, we try to break it down as much as possible, but again, it'll give you all the information you need. So moving on then, Ryan, another very topical subject for this time of year. Obviously, we're into the start of March. It's 1042S season. For anyone that's listening that might not know what a 1042S is or the struggles that goes on within that season, do you want to give an overview?
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. So I suppose, yeah, if you've never heard what a 1042S form is or what is 1042S reporting, the name of the 1042S form itself sometimes explains what it is. It's a foreign person's US source income subject to withholding. Very fancy name, but essentially what it does is, really outside of W-2 income that isn't for non-tax treaty exempt income, anything outside of that, any payments made to a non-resident that has US, tax implications should generally be reported on the 1042S. So, for any of the schools that are listening in, maybe you're paying out taxable scholarships, for an example. When I say taxable scholarships, generally anything outside of directly related to tuition or tuition related expenses, those are going to be taxable. So, if Ryan's getting his room and board allowance or his housing or meal plans, that's generally going to be reportable on a 1042S income document. We also have lots of folks, both with schools or other organizations, that can claim a tax treaty benefit on their, let's say, employment income. And maybe they can, exempt their first couple of $1,000s from any tax withholding. That portion that's exempt from tax, that actually goes on a 1042S to provide to them at the end of the tax year. So even prizes or rewards or even royalty income, these are all different examples of what can belong on a 1042S form. And if you, as the kind of the withholding agent, if it's your school that's paying it out or your organization that's providing this income to the individual, then you have a responsibility to issue those to the individual. And you also have reporting to the IRS on that. And the deadline is March 15th, typically every year.
Great. Thanks for that intro, Ryan. I guess it's fair to say it's a stressful time of year for payroll offices. We're seeing that payroll offices are working very hard during January to get out all of their W-2s, and then after that they're straight into preparing the 1042Ss. And I think if after we record this session, if we go back and look at our emails, I'm sure all three of us will have an email from somebody with questions on the 1042S. So I guess maybe, Ryan, if you have any tips or tricks on how to make it a little bit easier, that would be great.
Yeah, well, one, I would say, having knowledge of what's coming up ahead would be great, knowing what 1042S form is. I know we did an educational session with Simone Vance from William and Mary explaining what 1042S reporting requirements are. That's one thing that might help educate. That's widely available on across the Sprintax website. But I have to say, a software-based approach is probably going to make your life a lot easier. Every year, we're still seeing folks that are kind of going through a manual process of, literally completing a 1042S form, whether it's on paper or on a PDF, and it just eats time away. Like obviously here at Sprintax, we've got our own calculus product that helps folks to streamline 1042S reporting, but of course there's others out there as well to have a look at. I think when you look at the pros and cons of going software versus manual, you'll soon start to very quickly see how you could streamline processes, save your staff time, and overall actually help to manage this whole tax compliance process a little bit better.
Yeah, and I know on our side, on the calculus piece, we'd kind of recommend individuals try to file electronically just for ease, but maybe would you touch on when they might have to file electronically or when they can kind of file on paper? Might be interesting to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've definitely seen also a lot of schools that send it's called a 1042T, which basically is when the school are submitting the 1042S forms to the IRS by paper. But we're definitely seeing that as a common trend. More and more folks are using the e-filing method, which basically it's sending a TXT file through what's called the FIRE system to the IRS. So you're actually able to transmit all the 1042S information for all of your folks directly to the IRS electronically. If you're submitting less than 250 1042S forms, you don't have to. And I think that's why a lot of organizations still think they might need to go down the 1042T route. But we see across our schools a lot more are having us submit TXT files through our FIRE transmitter. But I definitely recommend doing that. And also, with a lot of the non-resident softwares, you can also get e-consent from the individual so that they can receive their 1042S form, electronically, which, we all want that. Getting W2s, almost everyone gives e-consent to get those. So if you give them a mechanism to do that for 1042Ss, it's also going to save your organization from having to head down to the printers and mail those forms out.
It's a good point. It shaves off hours even before you get to the amount of emails from students who, might not have received it because it got lost in the mail. So it's definitely the best approach.
Yeah, and think about, when was the last time maybe the organization had the right address on file? We've got probably 1042S forms that are, getting sent out to, an address that may have been on file, a very long time ago. So, I know that's an issue, Anna, as well, that we found even on our tax return side now with, folks filing and maybe not realizing that a 1042S had arrived in the mail or has received, or they're expecting to receive it.
Yeah, definitely. We've had some schools that we work with on the return side where they're starting to see codes being used and individuals who are starting to file their taxes, but they've yet to release their 1042S form. So they're wondering, how are these people filing? They might have received a W2 and are, being proactive and trying to get their taxes done well ahead of the deadline. But then come March 15th, they might get a 1042S form. They may have already mailed their documents or e-filed. Then they'll need to go about amending their tax return and adding the 1042S in. So maybe in communication with your payroll office, seeing when they expect 1042S forms to be released, communicating that with students, even including just a line in your emails going out to them. If you expect to receive a 1042S, hold off. You can start your tax return process, but hold off on completing and filing until you get all of your required income documents.
Yeah, definitely a big issue every year. I guess the same point we mentioned on the tax return piece, the earlier the better. But I know we've all received, communication from schools that might have, just found out about the 1042S piece, and are looking to prepare something as soon as possible. Anything on that, Ryan, you want to add?
Well, I
How to
think,
avoid it, I suppose, really.
yeah. Well, I think back on our last season, I vividly remember getting a phone call from a very worried school on the 12th of March, saying that they just realized that they had 1042S obligations and it fell on their desk. Thankfully, we managed to get them over the line by the 15th through calculus, but you know, like even with that example, you can imagine the sheer stress that it causes realizing what you need to do last minute. So, if you're able to try and get things prepared earlier, even try and have a vision of getting these submitted alongside or just after W2 season, it'd make life a lot easier. But I know that a lot of deadlines folks have to meet through this, in the new year. But I think it's kind of the old saying is, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So the earlier the better, we always say, but it's easier said than done, I know.
Definitely a lot of information in it. And any resources you'd recommend for anyone that might be starting off in a non-resident payroll office, not too sure about the 1042S piece, but they're eager to learn?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from our side, as Ryan mentioned earlier on, we've kind of tons of resources there between webinar decks, recordings, like non-resident payroll clinics, 1042S specific information. There's also tons on the IRS website as well on Form 1042S. It can be maybe less overwhelming than the treaties that Neil mentioned earlier on, but they have a lot of kind of condensed information on the 1042S piece there as well. Not sure if I missed out on anything there that you guys would jump in with.
No, I think it's a good start. You know, if you follow all of that, and you get that information, it's a great base to understand those forms that are applicable and also the processes that go around them.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I would say it's probably very hard to get good information out there on non-resident tax as kind of free resources. Obviously, the IRS website can sometimes become a maze. Um, but that's probably one thing I would add is and I can agree with anyone who's watching this is that it can be quite difficult or a challenge to get good information as a free resource out there on non-resident tax. So it's definitely something we want to change. So I suppose next topic, Anna, it might be great to introduce the world to the ITIN process. Some of the schools or folks that are tuning in might know what it is, but others might be new to the process. So would you mind kind of giving an overview of what it is and who needs one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose firstly on the ITIN piece, whenever we kind of present on this in person or virtually, we'll see like an eye roll or hear a sigh from everyone in the audience. It can be a bit of a headache probably and a heartache. But in terms of who needs an ITIN, it's generally anyone who receives taxable income and they need to file a federal tax return, but they're not actually eligible for a social security number. So we probably see it most commonly with scholarship recipients. A common question we might get is like, if I have a social security number, do I need an ITIN? No. And if they are eligible for a social security number, it will make them ineligible for an ITIN. So it's kind of it's often the last resort. If they're not eligible for an SSN, that's where the ITIN piece would jump in.
Right. And not everyone knows, Anna, that there's two ways to apply for an ITIN. Do you want to give an overview of the two different methods?
Yeah, definitely. So you can either apply for it in advance of the filing the federal tax return or alongside the federal tax return, but the process does change depending on which route they decide to go down. So if they're applying for the ITIN in advance of the federal tax return, generally when they're getting documents like their passport, visa, I-20, DS 2019 certified, a responsible officer at the school can generally do that. The application form is a W7 form. They'll mail, the certified copy, certification letter, and the signed W7 form off to the IRS. Then on the flip side, if they're filing for the ITIN alongside the federal tax return, it's certainly still possible. The application form will still be that W7, but the certification process changes. So if the responsible officer at the school can no longer certify the documents unless they're a certified acceptance agent, which can be a pretty rare occurrence. So like just to touch on kind of the other options for certification, it could be like at a local IRS office or with a certified acceptance agent or like the governmental department that issued their identification document, the US Embassy or consulate. But that kind of change can often slip through the cracks. So it's just kind of important to touch on it. If they're filing with the federal return, the responsible officer can't really certify the documents anymore.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks maybe don't realize those nuances and the differences in between. Um, I know a golden question I hear all the time, and it's always hard to give a golden answer to is how long is it going to take to hear back from the IRS around their ITIN application?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is the golden question. I suppose on the IRS website, it might indicate anywhere from around 7 weeks to 9 weeks. What we see on our side and what I think any schools tuning in will agree that it's much closer to a couple of months, especially if they're filing alongside the federal tax return. If they're filing on paper, like we're seeing processing times being anywhere from 6 to 12 months on the processing federal returns. So if that's alongside the W7, that could definitely be longer. So what we always would say on the ITIN piece is like file early and file often. If they know who's going to need an ITIN, pre-tax season, definitely try and you know manage a process there and filing in advance the federal return. That'd probably be some advice you might have there, but I'm not sure if you guys have anything else that you've seen on your side.
It's a funny one. I think that the ITIN process can be a bit of an enigma sometimes. Obviously, as part of the Sprintax business, we have the VIP area where we'll prepare tax returns, we'll prepare ITIN applications for generally government organizations that would provide quite high value scholarships to participants. And often the team have, in one case, I believe it was two twin brothers, that the ITIN application was prepared exactly the same. One was approved and the other wasn't, and there really wasn't a reason for that. So it can be difficult to know exactly why. I guess the only thing that I'd recommend is to be patient and be prepared to send it a couple of times before it does get approved.
Yeah, and I think the folks that have seen have been living this whole ITIN application world for many years. Often it can be like athletics departments or at schools where they know right off the bat that their folks are going to get, taxable scholarship and that they need to start applying for ITINs. We've definitely, at calculus, we've seen a lot more schools utilizing our ITIN functionality within calculus, and literally from very early on in the year, as soon as folks arrive, they've been getting everyone to log into their calculus portal and go through the process so that the W7 forms are produced, even the certification letter are produced, and that everyone's almost next stop going into providing their application packs to their responsible officers who sign the letters and then mail the applications out and then cross fingers. But definitely the earlier that you can file these applications, the better, because if you do get a rejection for whatever reason and for whatever reason, at least it gives you time to reapply again, because odds are you could file the exact same application again and that one might get accepted. So we're still trying to figure that one out.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the athletics piece a while ago, Ryan. Obviously last year we had a ton of big athletic schools coming to us that were spending hours and hours trying to get these ITIN applications prepared and submitted, only to get rejection letters. And since then, because of that, at the direct request of athletic schools, obviously Sprintax now has the ITIN preparation product, which is something that we wouldn't have done before. Normally, we would prepare ITINs through our software, but these specific athletic schools want us to manage every aspect of the process, from the generation of the W7 to the reach out to the athletes to get them to fill out their information. We'll do all the preparation of the certification letter and then just send one bulk file to the DSO to get them to sign it. So it's a lot more hands-on, and that was really just because of the frustration out there, that international officers were spending too much time on it. So it's an interesting trend to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just aside from that, a common question we'd often get on a lot of our webinars from international students when the ITIN piece comes up is like, if I didn't have income, if I just need the 8843, do I need an ITIN? So save yourselves the hassle when you don't need to apply for one. If you don't have any taxable income and don't need a federal tax return, the same goes for dependents. That question will come up a lot. You won't need an ITIN if it's just the 8843 that you need to file.
Great. Well, I guess last question then, Anna, and it's similar question we had with the other topics. What would you recommend in terms of resources for somebody looking to get a bit more information?
Yeah, again, similarly, the IRS website will have information on the ITIN piece. We also have blogs on the ITIN piece, and we also have another one coming out, I know, in the next week or two. I know we're also going to be hosting sessions specific for athletics departments, so keep an eye out for some information on those ones. And yeah, that probably touches on a lot of it. But anything that is coming our way in terms of common trends, we'll be sharing with the whole Sprintax community as well.
Yeah, good point, Anna, on the athlete session that we're doing. So next Thursday or Thursday the 9th, we are going to do a session. If this podcast or this session comes out afterwards, we can provide you with the recording. But definitely that'll focus in on the non-resident tax as it applies to athletes. So that might be a good resource. Okay, well, that's it for today's first Tax Talk session. If you do have any topics you want us to cover and discuss, please feel free to send it in to partners@sprintax.com and we'd be happy to have a look at it. But appreciate everybody listening in today.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks everyone. Happy tax season.